It's estimated that over 670 people disappear across the globe each day. Analysts have found it challenging to ascertain a precise figure, as many disappearances go unreported, and marginalized communities often get less assistance from law enforcement. Those that are reported become a top priority for the police, but not everyone that goes missing can be found. Number 5. 18-year-old Kimberly K Kersey had just begun her adult life. Kimberly was the oldest of 3 siblings to her parents, Ed and Andrea. The family lived a humble life at their home in Vancouver, Washington, and life for the family seemed perfect. Kristen, Kimberly's younger sister, described her as a protective and loving big sister. She was known to be fiercely loyal to her family and would go to any lengths to protect them. Kimberly's dad, Ed, commented that while she was only tiny, Kimberly certainly packed a punch and was much tougher than she looked. By March 11, 1987, Kimberly was just months away from graduating as a senior at Mountain View High School. Kimberly had good grades and was looking forward to what lay ahead for her. That morning, Kimberly left home, kissed her parents goodbye, and left the family home for the last time. Kimberly made it to school, and as the bell rang, signaling the end of the day, she grabbed her bags and began the walk home. Kimberly was particularly excited on March 11, 1987, as she planned to go to a basketball game in Tacoma, Washington with her boyfriend. Unfortunately, Kimberly never arrived at her boyfriend's house to go to the game, and never returned to the family's apartment. As evening fell in Washington, Kimberly's parents became anxious, and they called her boyfriend's home and were horrified to discover that Kimberly had never shown up for the basketball game. Kristen, Kimberly's younger sister, recalled, quote, "I remember I think I was opening a can of pickles, maybe some tuna, and my mom just kept saying, 'Where is she? Why hasn't she called?'" Many hours had now passed since Kimberly had been seen or heard from. Not wanting to wait a minute longer, Ed and Andrea picked up the phone and called the Clark County Sheriff's Office. Within minutes, squad cars descended upon the Landover apartment complex, and the search for Kimberly was on. Kristen, Ed, Andrea, and others in the family were questioned at length as investigators tried to determine when and where Kimberly had last been seen. Squads were sent out to look for any sign of Kimberly, while other officers stayed with the family. During the initial investigation, officers found the route that Kimberly may have taken from Mountain View High School to her home. According to the Charlie Project and KOIN, Kimberly often walked across a wooded area on Mill Plain Boulevard. This route was about 2 miles from the family home on Northeast 18th Street. Kimberly often walked this route as it was quicker, but she would sometimes get rides to school with friends or family. After establishing Kimberly's last movements, the Clark County Sheriff's Office sent search teams into the wooded area to look for any sign of her. The Sheriff's Office had received multiple witness sightings of Kimberly. According to these witnesses, she was last seen walking along Heartwood Boulevard toward the shortcut to her apartment. These witnesses did not specify whether she was alone or whether she was with anyone else in the area. On March 12, 1987, the search continued for Kimberly. Kimberly's mother, Andrea, found Kimberly's abandoned textbook and folder in the wooded shortcut. The discovery stoked fear in the Kersey family. As the hours ticked away, they became less and less hopeful that Kimberly would be coming home. Kimberly's boyfriend, who has not been named, has never been declared a suspect or person of interest. It seems that the police quickly ruled him out of the investigation. The community of Vancouver came together to help the Kersey family in their time of need. Residents assisted in the search for Kimberly and attended vigils in her honor. By mid-March, the search for Kimberly was slowing down, and her family continued to look for her every day. In the months and years following Kimberly's disappearance, the Clark County Sheriff's Office announced that they had 2 significant persons of interest in Kimberly's disappearance. The first is Russell Francis Slinger. According to court records, Russell was arrested in October of 1987 and charged with taking the life of a young woman. Russell's victim also walked close to where Kimberly disappeared when Russell attacked her. Investigators believe the circumstances are too similar for them to be a coincidence. Russell has never claimed responsibility for Kimberly's disappearance, and it's unknown how much further investigators have looked into him. A second possible suspect is an unidentified man that we can call Mr. X. According to the Charlie Project, Mr. X had a record of assault and lived close to the Landover apartments. No physical evidence has ever been uncovered to implicate either of these men in Kimberly's disappearance, and for now, it remains a complete mystery. Kimberly's father, Ed, told KOIN 6 News, quote, "I just think she came through the woods at the wrong time. I think it was as simple as that. Somebody was in the woods and grabbed her and they took off. I say they, I assume there were 2. In 1986, another tragedy would befall the Kersey family when Andrea, the family's matriarch, passed away from cancer. Andrea had been at the forefront of the hunt for her daughter, and now Kristen, Ed, and the rest of the Kerseys continued to carry the torch for Andrea. Ed told KOIN 6 that searches had gone as far out as Vancouver Lake, but there has still been no sign of her. Adorned on Andrea's headstone is a copper plaque that bears Kimberly's name, date of birth, and the word lost. Her family hopes that in the coming years they can remove the plaque and give her a burial. Kimberly K Kersey is described as a white female with blonde or strawberry blonde hair, blue eyes, 5'2" and 105 pounds. She was last seen wearing a white sweatshirt that read University of Paris, a pink turtleneck, light blue jeans, and white Keds brand shoes. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Clark County Sheriff's Office at 360-397-2211, quoting case number S873223, or Laura Desmond of NCMEC at 800-843-5678. Number 4. 33-year-old Caitlyn Rose Case had recently started a new job and was looking forward to her future. While she had been born and raised in Louisiana, her new career had taken her to Black Hawk, Colorado. Caitlyn was said to have been deeply connected with her family, making the move all the more difficult. Still, Caitlyn powered through, vowing to return to visit her family for the holidays and some other important events. In July of 2022, Caitlyn returned to her family's home to spend some time with them, but tragedy struck when she set off to make her way back to Colorado. In early 2022, Caitlyn found herself a job at the Lodge Casino in Black Hawk, Colorado, as an engineer and quickly flourished in her new environment. Her family and friends described her as a kind and compassionate woman who was often trusting of others even when they didn't deserve it. She was known to be a dependable and punctual employee, so her colleagues knew something was wrong when she never returned to work after a trip home to Louisiana. On July 31st, 2022, Caitlyn packed her bags and boarded a flight from Colorado to her native Louisiana. Her trip served 2 purposes. The first was spending time with her friends and family, and the second was purchasing a black GMC Envoy. Caitlyn was excited to collect her new car and spoke with colleagues in depth about it before she left. After touching down in Louisiana, Caitlyn caught a ride to her parents' home, where she was welcomed with open arms. Between July 31st and August 4th, Caitlyn spent time with her family and picked up the GMC Envoy. According to reports, this new car was purchased from someone the family knew. With her new car in tow, Caitlyn had to drive the 1,320-mile journey back to her home in Colorado. Her road trip would have taken around 20 hours and would have taken her through Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, and then Colorado, provided that she'd planned on taking the most direct route. On August 4th, 2022, Caitlyn kissed her family members goodbye for what would become the last time. Her family's last image of her is proudly stepping into her new GMC Envoy and driving into the distance. Her parents checked in with her regularly during the trip, reminding her to take breaks and rest when needed. According to the website Find Caitlyn, on the afternoon of August 5th, 2022, she called her father because she'd gotten lost somewhere in Texas. She told her father that the GPS system inside of her car wasn't working correctly, which was exacerbated by being in more rural parts of Texas with little to no service. Her father tried to direct Caitlyn back onto the highways, which would have taken her to Colorado, but it's still being determined as to whether this was achieved. At 5 p.m. that afternoon, all lines of communication between Caitlyn and her parents were cut off, and she was never seen or heard from again. When Caitlyn failed to contact her parents on August 6, 2022, to let them know that she'd arrived in Colorado safely, they filed a missing person report. Police in Houma, Louisiana immediately jumped into action and began searching for Caitlyn. Officers in Houma also worked with other departments to retrace Caitlyn's steps, and just a day later, they got their first breakthrough. According to the website set up by Caitlyn's family, on August 7, 2022, phone records were uncovered that showed that Caitlyn's phone had last pinged in Hugo, Oklahoma. Hugo sits close to the Oklahoma-Texas border, and it's possible that Caitlyn ended up here after getting lost during her time in Texas. It's also possible that Caitlyn decided to travel through Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas to reach her final destination of Black Hawk, Colorado, according to Google Maps. The Houma Police Department contacted the Hugo Police Department, who searched for Caitlyn in the area close to her last ping, but unfortunately, no sign of her was found. On August 8, 2022, Caitlyn's father decided to head to Hugo to look for his daughter, and according to the website, has essentially lived there since the daughter went missing. On August 12, 2022, investigators made a shocking discovery when Caitlyn's brand new black GMC Envoy was found behind a private gated home just south of Fort Towson in Choctaw County, Oklahoma. Reports indicate that the car looked like it had been pushed down a steep embankment in an attempt to send it crashing into the Kiamichi River below. Thankfully, the car had become wedged between trees before it could be sent cascading off of a 75-foot cliff. While investigators were excited about this development, their excitement was short-lived. There was no sign of Caitlyn in the car, and all of her belongings, such as her purse, phone, and wallet, had been left behind. Investigators searched through Caitlyn's bank statements and discovered that she'd visited several gas stations in Texas on August 5, 2022, shortly before her disappearance. They also began to believe that it wasn't Caitlyn who had entered Oklahoma, and were now considering that she may have met with foul play. With the possibility of foul play involved, local law enforcement turned Caitlyn's case over to the OSBI, or the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, and a search of the property where Caitlyn's car was discovered was conducted. However, according to Caitlyn's family, the search was short-lived because the property owner requested that the search crew leave. The only clue in Caitlyn's disappearance came in the form of a 911 call that was received in Hugo, Oklahoma, on the evening of August 5th at around 10:53 p.m. For unknown reasons, the call made by Caitlyn's phone was never dispatched by the office, and it's unknown who made the call. Investigators don't believe that Caitlyn was in charge of her car upon entering Oklahoma, and this 911 call may have held the answer to those questions. It also appears that Caitlyn's phone tried to make other 911 calls, but these were not answered either. Caitlyn's last confirmed movement in Texas was at 6:10 p.m. when her phone connected to a Wi-Fi network in Cunningham, and then at 9:17 p.m. when she was last seen leaving Paris on US 79. Since then, there's been no sign of Caitlyn, and her family is desperate for answers. Caitlyn Rose Case is described as a white female with brown hair, brown eyes, 5'5" and 130 to 140 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact Special Agent Sonny Stewart of the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation at 580-298-5525, quoting case number OSBI 2022693. Number 3. 27-year-old Christine Slinger was described as a loving and devoted mother to her 2 children. Both of these children had resulted from different relationships, but this did little to affect their relationship towards one another growing up. According to reports, Christine's daughter had previously lived with her father, Stephen Stafford, before custody was once again given back to Christine. Unfortunately, the circumstances around this are unknown. By all accounts, Christine was a good mother, and by the time 2017 had rolled around, she and her kids were happy. One balmy August night, Christine disappeared without a trace, leaving her family with more questions than answers. On August 20th, 2017, Christine visited her mother's house on the 3300 block of Hilton Street in Massillon, Ohio. Christine stayed with her mother for a few hours before Stephen Stafford II, her ex-boyfriend with whom she shared a daughter, arrived at 7 p.m. to get Christine and take her to New Philadelphia, Ohio, where he was now living and where their daughter was currently staying. Shortly after 7 p.m., Christine said goodbye to her mother for what would become the last time, and the two hopped into Stephen's car and began the 25-mile journey to New Philadelphia. From here, what happened is according to Stephen, since Christine is no longer here to tell her side of the story. Stephen alleges that shortly into their 25-mile trip, the two got into an argument, and the subject of the argument has never been revealed. After arguing, Christine asked him to drop her off at the Sandy Valley Estates mobile home park, located on State Route 800 in Magnolia, Ohio, around 22 miles from Christine's mother's home in Massillon. Christine angrily watched out of the car, and Stephen continued his drive home to his daughter. Hours later, Stephen received a call from Christine's mother asking where she was, as she hadn't been in contact with her. It was then that the two of them realized that Christine was missing, and the Stark County Sheriff's Office was called in to investigate. Unfortunately, it's never been discerned whether the Sandy Valley Estates mobile home park was a random location or whether Christine knew someone who lived there. What investigators uncovered was that in the weeks and months before Christine's disappearance, she'd gotten a new boyfriend, and it appears Stephen was not happy about this. Stephen wasn't happy about the relationship, not because he was jealous, but because Christine's new boyfriend had an extensive criminal history and had been convicted of crimes that would be enough to make anyone's stomach turn. It's also turned out that Stephen had been trying to file for custody of his daughter in light of Christine's new boyfriend. It's unknown whether Christine knew this was happening or whether the latest court proceedings would have shocked her. Shortly after Christine was reported missing, the Stark County Sheriff's Office began their search, and the first person they wanted to speak to was Stephen Stafford. Multiple investigations of the Massillon and Magnolia areas failed to show any signs of Christine. On August 22nd, the Stark County Sheriff's Office investigators requested Stephen's presence at the station. They wanted to interview him and administer a polygraph test to see whether he was telling the truth about the night of August 20th. Investigators readied their equipment in anticipation of Stephen's arrival, but when the morning came, he failed to show up at the police station. The police first feared that he'd gone on the run because he was responsible for what had happened to Christine. But what they would uncover would be much darker. When Stephen failed to arrive at the police station, investigators immediately headed to his home in New Philadelphia. Investigators readied themselves, wondering whether Stephen would try to attack them. But as they entered Stephen's new home's front door, they noticed it was eerily quiet. After checking the first few rooms, they found Stephen deceased. The investigation report would later state that Stephen had taken his own life. He left behind a note with a single sentence, "Tell my daughter I love her." The police were now even more confused. Why had Stephen taken his own life? Was it because he was guilty? Or because he couldn't live with the pain of losing the mother of his children? Either way, investigators knew that they'd lost a vital witness and possibly crucial information. Stephen's body was transported to the medical examiner's office, where his family would claim him for burial. The Stark County Sheriff's Office obtained cell phone data from Stephen and Christine on the day that she disappeared. According to the reports, Stephen's phone pinged in and around Massillon and New Philadelphia, backing up his story about dropping Christine off at the trailer park before going home. Investigators have been unable to confirm whether Stephen went anywhere else on August 20th, and there's been no evidence to suggest otherwise. Stephen is considered a person of interest in Christine's case, but now that he's gone, investigators have many holes in their theories. Unfortunately, no sign of Christine has ever been found, despite the combined efforts of the Stark County Sheriff's Office and the Texas search teams and residents of Massillon. The investigation into Christine's mysterious disappearance is still ongoing, but investigators are no closer to solving the case than they were in 2017. Christine Lynn Slinger is described as a white female with brown hair, brown eyes, 5'3" and 120 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Green of the Stark County Sheriff's Office at 330-430-3030. 3800, quoting case number 1733453. Number 2. 62-year-old Fern Baird of Park City, Utah, was described as a kind and caring woman. Fern was extremely close with her family, and there was nothing that the family enjoyed more than being in the great outdoors. Fern was described as an experienced outdoorsman, but she always preferred sticking to the well-traveled trails instead of seeking new ones. That's not to say that Fern wasn't an adrenaline junkie, and during the winter seasons, she would often teach skiing classes at the Deer Valley Resort in Park City, Utah. Fern was a successful businesswoman with Powder Beach Realty when not outdoors. Fern was a master of her craft and would often seal the deal with clients looking to buy a home to live in for the holidays. As if Fern's life wasn't busy enough, she'd also had a booming business on the side called Yopa Bag. This company, founded by Fern, made bags specifically designed to carry yoga equipment. Fern was incredibly proud of her creation and enjoyed watching her business grow. In October of 2020, Fern decided to schedule herself a few days away from the hustle and bustle of working life. She booked a hotel in Blaine County, Idaho, packed up her car, and made the 323-plus-mile trip from her home in Park City, Utah. According to Google Maps, the drive would have taken Fern around 5 hours. When Fern arrived in Idaho, she pulled into the hotel's car park and checked herself into her room. On October 19, 2020, Fern awoke earlier than usual. She donned her hiking gear, packed her backpack, and spoke to a concierge at the desk, asking them which trails and paths were best. After a brief conversation, Fern said goodbye, and this would become the last confirmed sightings of her. Fern jumped into her black 2018 Subaru Crosstrek and drove to the Prairie Creek Trailhead in the Sawtooth National Forest. At 1:17 p.m., Fern signed the trail's logbook, writing her name and "to the lake and back." It's believed that Fern had planned on hiking the entire trail, a 10-mile loop that runs along Highway 75. Two other trails, the Prairie Lakes Trail and the Minor Lakes Trail, also run closely to the Prairie Creek Trail. And according to park officials, it isn't unusual for people to confuse the routes and get lost. There are also several mountains in the area that many hikers climb and end up unable to find their way down. As night fell, the staff at the hotel Fern was staying at noticed that she hadn't returned from her hike. They assumed that she'd chosen to remain in the forest for the night. When October 22nd came and there was still no sign of Fern, the hotel staff became increasingly concerned. She'd not returned to her room or checked out of the hotel as planned. Later that morning, staff at the hotel called the Blaine County Sheriff's Department and reported Fern missing. Minutes later, the Blaine County Sheriff's Department and the Blaine County Sheriff's Search and Rescue Team arrived at the scene. They immediately began trying to put together Fern's last movements, which is when they discovered that she'd planned to hike Prairie Creek Trail. When they arrived, they found Fern's abandoned black 2018 Subaru Crosstrek. At the trailhead, they found Fern's entry into the logbook, along with an entry of 5 hikers from Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Blaine County Sheriff's Office had difficulty decoding the group's message and handwriting, and in reports they stated that they believed the logbook was signed by the name Adkins. Investigators were keen to speak to this group as they had entered the trail shortly after Fern. After several appeals and broadcasts were made, this group came forward and told investigators that they had not seen Fern on their trip. After discovering that nobody had physically seen Fern on the trail, investigators began to search the trailhead and the Prairie Lakes and Minor Lakes trails for Fern. The Sawtooth National Forest encompasses over 2.1 million acres, and search and rescue teams took to the skies in helicopters. Ground teams also deployed sniffer dogs, horses, and motorcycles to find Fern. The search was often hampered by bad weather, with searchers braving temperatures of -3 some days. The mountains and rugged terrains also proved challenging for some searchers. Fern's friends and family also joined in on the search where they could. They made media appeals, handed out flyers, and put up posters, hoping that someone had seen her. The search for Fern continued until October 30th, 2020, when the Blaine County Sheriff's Office officially called it off. In a statement, Blaine County Sheriff Steve Harkins, said, quote, "This is not the outcome we were hoping for, but we've exhausted our resources." In the wake of Fern's disappearance, her family has put up a $25,000 reward for any information that leads to her recovery. Investigators believe Fern may have veered off the trail and succumbed to the elements. Fern Alexandra Lovett Baird is described as a white female with brown hair, brown eyes, 5'5" and 115 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact Lieutenant Mike Abay of the Blaine County Sheriff's Office at 208-788-5555, quoting case number BCS 2010006. Number 1. 27-year-old Pepita Madeline Redhair was described as a determined and headstrong young woman. Pepita was a member of the Navajo Nation and took pride in her heritage, ensuring to keep up with the traditions of her ancestors. Pepita was an engineering student at the University of New Mexico and hoped to become an engineer someday. If engineering didn't work out, Pepita wanted to teach and inspire the next generation. When not studying hard towards her degree, Pepita also worked at the local Hot Topic, which gave her enough money to get by. Pepita was exceptionally close with her family, especially her mother, Anita King. So when contact stopped one day, her family knew something was very wrong. On March 24th, 2020, Anita drove Pepita to her new boyfriend, Nicholas Key's house in the 1000 block of Clement Street in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Pepita often split her time between her boyfriend's house and her mother's, and Anita had agreed to drive her daughter that evening. When the two said goodbye, Anita had no idea it would be the last time. In the weeks before her disappearance, Pepita admitted to her mother that Nicholas had been aggressive towards her and drank heavily. Anita tried to persuade Pepita to return home with her, but Pepita wanted to see Nicholas. A few days passed without word from Pepita, and deep down in her gut, Anita knew something was very wrong. Pepita always answered her mother's texts and calls, and in interviews with local media, Anita said that her mother's intuition kicked in. On March 27th or March 30th, depending on the source, of 2020, Anita would receive a text that would send her world upside down. Her phone pinged with a message from Pepita, but as she read the contents of the message, her heart sank. The text was from a man who claimed that he had been sold Pepita's phone a few days ago. After receiving this text, Anita contacted the Albuquerque Police Department to try and report her daughter missing. The APD refused to take Anita's report. Anita later recalled the APD's response, saying, quote, "The cops kind of just brushed it off. They said she's an adult, she's free to travel. She's free to be missing, I was told. I was pretty upset." According to reports, Anita also reached out to the Navajo Nation government, but they also offered her no support. News outlets across New Mexico refused to air Pepita's story without approval from the APD. It wasn't until April 19th of 2020, when Nicholas K reported Pepita missing, that her case was taken seriously. Anita had rung the police department every day asking for an update or a meeting with an officer, and her persistence finally paid off. In his report, Nicholas told investigators that on the night of March 26, 2020, he and Pepita had gone out drinking and had gotten into an argument. In a fit of rage, Pepita walked out on Nicholas and later sent him a text, telling him that she was with another man. In his statement to the Albuquerque Police Department, Nicholas stated that he believed the man in question was a man that Pepita and he had met the night before. Unfortunately, no further details have been released about this man, and his involvement remains undetermined. Anita told the media that shortly after her daughter's disappearance, she drove to Nicholas's home in the 1000 block of Clement Street to collect her daughter's items, and that Nicholas had never made contact with her since. He's never called to ask Anita if there are any updates in Pepita's case, and he maintains his innocence. In May of 2020, the Albuquerque Police Department received a bizarre tip when someone called them with a possible sighting of Pepita. According to the caller, they'd seen Pepita, or someone who looked like her, panhandling on 2nd Street and Freeway in downtown Albuquerque. Investigators have never been able to confirm whether this sighting was Pepita, and there are currently no persons of interest in her case. Some people, including Anita, believed that Pepita met with foul play, but so far, there's been no evidence to suggest this. In October of 2020, Anita and another Navajo woman took to the streets to bring awareness to the MMIW epidemic that's plaguing New Mexico and the rest of the US. According to an interview that Anita gave with The Lily, the march was supposed to be a small affair where they would hand out flyers with Pepita's details on it. However, when word spread around town and via social media, hundreds of people turned up. The march event attracted Navajo tribal leaders and some attorneys who agreed to take on Pepita's case and make up for where the Albuquerque police had failed. Anita had been vocal about the shortcomings of the Albuquerque Police Department in the aftermath of her daughter's disappearance. She told the media, quote, "We started printing missing person flyers with my own money, and we just started passing out flyers in Albuquerque. We were just continuing with our own investigation." The red hair community would take another blow in 2021 when Pepita's father passed away, never knowing what had happened to his beloved daughter. Anita and Pepita's sister, Shelda Livingston, continued advocating for Pepita and other MMIW. Pepita Madeline Redhair is described as a Native American Navajo Nation female with brown hair, brown eyes, 5'1" and 141 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Christopher Enyart of the Albuquerque Police Department at 505-768-2020, quoting case number 2000-32487. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.